There's nobody quite like Werner Herzog, and Encounters at the End of the World is among his best documentaries. I think it would be reductive to claim that the film has a single central thesis, or it would at least ruin a lot of the fun of watching it. Any decent analysis has to meander a little bit, like the film itself, but I'm going to do my best to make sense of it. The film's title is as good a place to start as any: Encounters at the End of the World. The end of the world can mean two things. It can mean the geographic end of the world, a remote place that most people will never see. It can also be read in the apocalyptic sense. The religious connotations of that word will become relevant later on. I want to think about the first interpretation of end of the world, in the geographic sense. We meet a wide range of people throughout the film. Some of them arrive through pretty conventional means. In Antarctic terms, that usually means they're scientists, but some of them have more varied backgrounds. For instance, Scott Rowland is a former banker who decided to give up his job and join the Peace Corps before coming to Antarctica, and he narrates a near-death experience that he had along the way. Perhaps the most revealing anecdote comes from Stefan Pashav, described as a philosopher and forklift driver.
Explored many different lens of the mind and many worlds of ideas, and I started before I even knew how to read and write. My grandmother was reading the Odyssey and the Iliad to me, so I started my journey in my fantasy before I even knew the means of accomplishing it, but my mind and my psyche was ready for it. I was already traveling with Odysseus and with the Argonauts and to those strange and amazing lands, and that always stayed with me, that fascination of the world, and that I fell in love with the world, and it's been very powerful, and it's been with me this whole time.
He discusses how his early exposure to mythology and philosophy led to a fascination with the world, and then Herzog asks him about his path to Antarctica.
And how does it happen that we are encountering each other here at the end of the world?
I think that that's a logical place to find each other, because this place works almost as a natural selection for people that have this intention to jump off the margin of the map. And we all meet here, where all the lines of the map converge. There is no point that is south of the South Pole. And I think there is a fair amount of the population here which are full-time travelers and part-time workers. So yes, those are the professional dreamers. They dream all the time. And I think through them, the great cosmic dreams come into fruition, because the universe dreams through our dreams. And I think that there is many different ways for the reality to bring itself forward, and dreaming is definitely one of those ways.
I'm fascinated by several of the phrases that Pashav uses here, and I think they provide the key to understanding the people that appear throughout the film. The idea that Antarctica's inhabitants arrived because of a desire to jump off the margin of the map suggests that they don't fit within the normal, everyday world for one reason or another. Scott Rowland's wanderings grew out of a realization that the world's not all about money, so he no longer fit within the conventional value system that he had inhabited up to that point. Pashav's own journey began when he heard the story of Odysseus. The reference to this particular myth is incredibly important. The word Odyssey, meaning a kind of wandering journey, comes from the title of the epic poem that narrates Odysseus' struggle to return home after the Trojan War. His alienation throughout this process, from his wife, his son, and his homeland, may tell us something about Pashav. His constant wandering and his desire to jump off the margin of the map have certainly led to some fascinating adventures, but perhaps alienation is an inherent component of those adventures. Odysseus is trying desperately to return home, but we never hear about such a return from Pashav. Odysseus can't return home for a decade because he offended Poseidon. Perhaps the reference also suggests that our Antarctic travelers are restrained by some higher force, that the universe is conspiring to keep them wandering. Maybe it sounds like a stretch to suggest that the film is claiming, through a simple reference to the Odyssey, that wanderers are a feature of the natural order or some kind of expression on the part of the cosmos, but I'm not so sure. Pashav also talks about dreams. He claims that the universe dreams through our dreams, and the professional dreamers in Antarctica are somehow outlets for the larger cosmic dream. Perhaps these wanderers and dreamers are expressions of a universal impulse towards expansion and extension, pressing towards the farthest reaches of the world. And this impulse is not restricted to human beings. In a clip that has been nicknamed Nihilist Penguin, the drive to venture towards the end of the Earth finds expression in Antarctica's most iconic animal. I actually think Nihilist Penguin is a misnomer, or at least doesn't capture the full picture of what's going on here. Herzog asks a scientist if penguins ever get deranged after they've had enough.
Dr. Ainley, is there such thing as insanity among penguins? I try to avoid a definition of insanity or derangement. I don't mean that a penguin might believe he or she is Lenin or Napoleon Bonaparte. But could they just go crazy because they've had enough of their colony?
But the scientist describes what's going on here as disorientation.
Well, I've never seen a penguin bashing its head against a rock. They do get disoriented. They end up in places they shouldn't be, long way from the ocean.
That word implies that the penguin has lost its sense of place or belonging, not that it has somehow given up on life. Herzog also highlights how the penguin, before running towards the distant mountains, stands between two separate groups going about the daily business of penguinhood. Like the Antarctic travelers we've met, the penguin can't find its place within the conventional order and is driven to jump off the margin of the map. This isn't just a human drive, but a cosmic, natural animal impulse towards the ends of the Earth. So maverick individuals like renegade penguins and the cosmic order writ large are driven to faraway places by some impulse that is baked into the universe. But why Antarctica, both for the people that choose to call it home and for Herzog himself? Well, partially because it's the end of the world. Pashev points out that there is no point that is south of the South Pole. It's the end of the line. But I think there's something else that's going on here as well. Antarctica is a place of extremes. It's the coldest place on Earth, with some areas getting close to negative 140 degrees Fahrenheit. A little over 1,000 species manage to live in Antarctica, over 1 million in Australia as a point of comparison. And it's obviously pretty sparsely populated by humans, with only about 5,000 there in the summer and 1,000 there in the winter. I think Herzog uses the extremeness of the place to explore the relationship between humankind and the natural world. Perhaps treating them as separate in the first place is a false premise. The natural world is not a static, impersonal place, but something alive in its own right, something that encompasses humanity and animals and the landscape itself. Here's a scientist named Douglas McKyle.
So here I'm sitting in this lovely warm lab, and just outside is the environment that Scott and Shackleton first faced when they came here about 100 years ago. Unlike Scott and Shackleton, who viewed the ice as this sort of static monster that had to be crossed to get to the South Pole, we scientists now are able to see the ice as a dynamic, living entity that is sort of producing change, like the icebergs that I study. For me, it's been a wild ride. First of all, I found out that the iceberg that I came down to study not only was larger than the iceberg that sank the Titanic, it was not only larger than the Titanic itself, but it was larger than the country that built the Titanic. That's pretty big. This is B-15. So what we see here is the White Cliff. It's about 150 feet tall. So that means that there's over 1,000 feet of ice below the waterline. This iceberg is so big that the water that it contains would run the flow of the River Jordan for 1,000 years.
He certainly emphasizes the extreme nature of this iceberg, highlighting its massive scale and the fact that a huge portion of it lies beneath the surface, invisible to human eyes. Nature's vastness is quite literally incomprehensible to normal human perception. But perhaps even more significant is his emphasis on the living nature of this iceberg. It is huge and imposing, its scale almost impossible to grasp, but it is also alive and dynamic. Also massive, alive, and in a state of constant flux is Mount Erebus, an active volcano in Antarctica. According to Herzog, it's also one of only 3 volcanoes in the world that opens up to the Earth's interior. Erebus, like the iceberg, is a demonstration of the natural world's dynamism. It is so dynamic, in fact, that visitors need to be taught how to dodge globs of lava. The volcano serves as a window into primeval natural forces. Peering into it is fraught with danger, but perhaps it can lead to important insights into our place in the world. Maybe the promise of this realization, this understanding that humans are embedded within a massive system of constant change, is precisely what draws wanderers to Antarctica. Yes, it is a remote land of extremes in which very few organisms can eke out an existence, but it's also a place that reveals that nature isn't all that different from humankind, or perhaps that the two are inseparable. Let's stay with Mount Erebus for a little bit. I think the most remarkable thing we learn about it is that some intrepid explorers have actually descended into it, journey to the center of the Earth style. So explorers are drawn to this land of extremes, perhaps because it offers a glimpse at an important cosmic truth about natural processes of change and humanity's place within them. But for some people, a glimpse isn't enough. It isn't sufficient to fly over an ever-changing iceberg or peer over the rim of an active volcano in order to witness this natural change. Some are drawn to actually reintegrate themselves into that process, to actually enter that flow by descending into a boiling hotspot of change, even if it means getting singed by a ball of magma or running towards near certain death. This isn't the only descent into the primordial that we witness in the film. We also see scientists using drills and dynamite to bore a tunnel through a thick sheet of ice in order to reach the water contained below. Herzog's description of the divers as they prepare for their perilous journey is incredibly rich in meaning.
I noticed that the divers in their routine were not speaking at all. To me, they were like priests preparing for Mass. Under the ice, the divers find themselves in a separate reality where space and time acquire a strange new dimension. Those few who have experienced the world under the frozen sky often speak of it as going down into the cathedral.
Afterwards, we get a long meditative series of shots beneath the ice, accompanied by ethereal music, befitting the comparison between this alternate dimension and a cathedral. The segment lasts over 3 minutes, but it feels even longer, and it serves as an opportunity for contemplation, one of several throughout the film. Just as time takes on a unique quality for the divers, it seems to warp for viewers as well. We see the strange creatures that inhabit this dimension as the divers explore a place that seems to be frozen in time. But this place isn't static. Sure, it might seem that way compared to a lake of boiling, exploding lava. But recall what we learned earlier. These huge, seemingly impersonal natural forces are just as alive as we are. The changes may be imperceptible on the scale of human time, but they are equally part of this dynamic flow that Herzog has been interested in throughout the entire film. Herzog's comparison of the divers to priests entering a cathedral is incredibly important. Religious services serve all kinds of functions, but one way to interpret them is as an opportunity for reunification, with other members of that religious community, yes, but also with the universe or the cosmic order as a whole. Participants in these services acknowledge that there is some reality that transcends them, that is larger than them, but that they are also inseparable from. Perhaps this is exactly what the divers are acknowledging as well. Perhaps it is also what brought the volcano spelunkers to descend towards the lava lake. And maybe the promise of reunification is also what attracted all of the outcasts that we've seen throughout the film. Maybe the only way they could feel integrated with the larger cosmic order was to jump off the margin of the map. Our wanderers might be like Odysseus. Alienation is a necessary step on the path to reunification. This is a film about outcasts and wanderers and penguins and the relationship between humankind and nature, but ultimately it's about the larger order that encompasses all of these things. Thanks for watching.